So this is just a Q&A, right? I'm curious how you prepared Dave to become the landscape director for Carborough. What's your background?
Long and winding, meandering. I started doing green industry stuff back in 2000 when I graduated from high school. I started working for the Massachusetts Horticultural Society as a summer job for 4 years, and that was awesome. On the side, I started doing residential landscaping, and then moved to a couple different states. Went to California, worked for Botanical Garden and Park, did some groundskeeping there. Moved to Virginia, where I worked for the City Falls Church, became a certified arborist as part of their urban forestry division. So I also plant trees, which I love. And then I moved down to North Carolina, got a job at the town of Carborough. Still doing all the same kind of landscaping, groundskeeping, and arborist related stuff.
But did you say what your degree was in?
It's not.
So you just kind of figured all this out.
Yeah, I studied psychology. I went to school for psychology in Boston. But I didn't really want to be in an office, and I liked what I was doing for my summer job so much that I really know that I want to be outside doing things with plants. So that's kind of how that went. But every step of the way, I've had access to textbooks, and I've worked really hard for certifications, and I like to absorb knowledge. So when someone's talking, I love to listen to what they have to say, get excited about what they're excited about, and just kind of go from there. So.
You were the first key. Sorry, just a Kathy.
Because I think that you're all really thinking about how do we transition from where we are to a new place. And it is a system, and within the system there are all these pieces, there are all these parts that are working against the system that you envision. And some of that is because of business interests, some of that is for other reasons, some cultural resistance. And I'm wondering if in all of your different approaches, if you could just think about what is your strategy for reaching those audiences and those members of our system who are working against the system that you're envisioning. There's a whole lot of cultural resistance, and you talked about partnering, but thinking beyond some of the groups that are kind of like-minded and thinking about the not so like-minded groups. Just thoughts on that?
Well, I'm kind of my intelligence is like around language. Like I don't know, that's just who I am. I'm a phonetic learner and was raised by language professors and so on. So I think a lot about languaging and the way I word things to people. And so, especially when it comes to the transition movement in particular, you know, it's founded on the concept of climate change, peak oil, and economic instability. And economic instability, I think, is something, especially after the recession, that most people can really wrap their heads around and kind of, yeah, I get that. Peak oil and climate change are different things. So depending on who I'm speaking to or what audience I'm speaking to, I'll completely change that wording around and say, instead of climate change, I'll say increasing unpredictability of weather patterns, or in the case of a severe storm, you know, or major weather system or a major disturbance, and not take it to the climate change place if people aren't ready to hear that. You know, if they're gonna build up their walls and shut me off and block me out completely when I say the phrase climate change, I'm not gonna use that phrase. I'm gonna talk about Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy and things like that. So languaging is a really big piece of it for me, and I'm talking kind of on the scale of like person to person, or me speaking to an audience or something like that. But that's the biggest example that pops out for me.
I guess I see so many environmental connections, and I think everybody is really interested in something or several somethings, but at least one thing that's a favorite interest of theirs, concern of theirs, that's linked to the environment perhaps in a way they don't know. And so I try to find out what people are about and what they're interested in, and then create, help them understand linkages between that and how it would be better and how their goals would be met if we created a sustainable future. But I don't use those words because, of course, that's not going to land. But using again like the language that would make sense for somebody to understand, and try to meet people where they are. But there are groups of people, if you look at like the diffusion of innovation or diffusion of information, there are groups of people who are perhaps the last group that one might approach, because they would be very difficult, or there's something maybe fundamental in their perspective that's going to make it hard to ever bring them around. But there are lots of people who, really are interested. I mean, nobody probably thinks it's okay to go to the store and eat food that's poisoned. Nobody wants to do that, and we feel like we have kind of a contract with the government that there should be laws that would not be allowed. And yet, most people don't necessarily know which foods are, if they're eating conventionally, going to be the lowest pesticide foods that they for exposure, or what that kind of exposure might mean to a pregnant mother or something like that. And so I think everybody's interested whether they know it or not.
I think part of my response is going to be similar, but the first part, two-part here. One is enthusiasm, and if enthusiasm is infectious. If you can get excited about something, for people who maybe aren't in the know, they might also get excited about it. So trying to find something, either one or two details about the topic that excites you personally, and then really just go at it, and they might find those same things exciting. Maybe the creativity about how to solve problems, etc. The other thing is for people who are really deeply ingrained, trying to figure out, carry on the thought down the line to figure out how everything's connected and what's going to yield results for them. Part of what I do is trying to deal with the planning side of things and work with developments. And they're looking at dollars and cents on a lot of things. So if I can extrapolate or just kind of follow through all of those details that are part of what I'm trying to promote and how those things are going to relate to them in a very practical manner, that tends to sell them, because they may not know all the ins and outs. If you sort of just follow it on down the line, so that, they're going to have a response for everything. You have to be ahead of them enough to say, yes, but, and then. And I think that's kind of how I approach it, and it doesn't always work, but a lot of the times you're going to get them to really start thinking about things and change some of the details.
I like this just really brief thing. One of my student groups did a research project this past semester. They were looking at university procurement, with purchasing. And they spoke with a procurement officer at one university who said, look, I am not an environmentalist. But that procurement office purchased all kinds of green stuff. And she said, I'm not an environmentalist. It just makes sense to buy things that are non-toxic. It just makes sense to buy things that are sustainable. But I'm not an environmentalist. And we were like, yes, you are so right. Go you.
I have a hard time convincing people not to eat toxins when they've remanufactured seed so that the plant grows up toxic so that pests won't bother it. And then that's the stuff that the poor people have to buy with their food stamps. There's something wrong with the system, that we have this industrialized agricultural system that is increasing the rates of cancer, and like I just told Luke Power, I'm going to live to 100 or die hiking unless you deny me of my fresh air. But,
They're working on that, I'm sure. Not Duke, but yeah.
but seriously, we have an industrial political complex that does not have that mindset, cheap is beautiful, whereas there is no such thing as cheap. Buying cheap, you end up with a cheap life that is short.
Yeah, that makes me think of externalized costs in general, and that almost, we just are accustomed, we are culturalized to not recognize that all these cheap things that we're buying have other costs. That's why they're cheap. The cost is passed on to the next whoever, whatever, whatever ecosystem, whatever village in India that no longer has water because Coca-Cola set up a bottling plant, what have you. We're blinded to that. We are marketed to and fed advertisements and sold that this is what's going to make us happy, and then that's the end of the story. And we need to work on collectively as a culture, as a village, as friends and peers, recognizing that those cheap things have costs that we're not paying for directly, at least for a few generations or a few years.
Although that doesn't mean that a sustainable future is expensive, I'm sure you're not saying, because obviously you would have food in your yard and things like that,
Right.
which a person could say is cheap, but it could be, exceptional quality, and
Right.
so we have to try to make distinctions.
Right, because we're sold it. This is what I need to make me happy.
Meat comes in a package with styrofoam on the bottom, and right.
Okay, well, I just want to follow up with that by saying that, Julie and I talked about how we had some trouble getting folks here on occasion. And these are folks who buy organic food and are very loud about being anti-GMO, which is ironic because when you consider the exposure of pesticides in your environment daily, even if you're not using them as an individual in your home, they're in your parks, they're in your kids' school. There's actually a survey out with NC State right now that Toxic Free NC is also working on. They've been here the past 2 workshops, and I'm working with them. We're working with them in some capacity now. There was a measure, and I might have this wrong, this exact thing. There was a measure passed called something like the Children's Safety Act, Health Safety Act in 2006. And it was detailing how public schools in North Carolina, you weren't supposed to be able to spray pesticides. Are you familiar with this, David?
It's sounding familiar, yeah.
Okay, so you're not supposed to be able to spray pesticides inside the school during school hours. Seems really, elementary. We would know that that's not a good thing to do while kids are in the school. Not on the campus, not in the cafeteria, not, out on the baseball field or football field or wherever. And NC State is compiling this survey, and they're finding out that pesticides are sprayed all the time while these kids are in school. And there is no fail-safe. There's no one measuring this. There's no one saying, okay, well, this is maybe a bad idea to be doing this. You guys have already put this in play. There's no one enforcing it whatsoever. So we have these things that are very, very obvious for the individual. But then the individual can choose as a consumer, do I want this or not? And then maybe some other things, they throw up their hands and they say, well, that's out of my realm of wanting to go after that, to stop that. Or maybe they just don't know. So my question to you guys is, what kind of pesticide policy action should we have in Asheville, in other cities in North Carolina? Perhaps maybe not bans, perhaps maybe integrated pest management, but what kind of actions should we look forward to having in the future?
I think if the results of that NC State study were shared via email or whatever with every single member of every PTA in the state, that might really just be the most effective thing to do.
You're exactly right. I'm actually working on that.
That might just really
Yeah.
get it done.
Yeah.
My initial thought is that schools are usually focused on grades, and they're focused on getting the support financially for the classroom and not so much the grounds. They're not really going to be overseeing those contracts very closely. They're probably not managing their grounds very tightly. And I can think of an example that I've heard of recently where someone was caught applying pesticides during school
You
hours.
saw that, yeah.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was a lack of oversight. I'm pretty sure that there's no one from the school organization that is saying, okay, who's managing this contract, who's laying down the groundwork, what are the penalties towards the contractor when they violate the rules. So it really comes down to a tonal shift of how we're going to apply our regulations and get the school administrators to pay attention to things that aren't just grades and or athletic activities. I don't have an answer, it's just really kind of getting them to really understand that there's more to everything than just the grades.
And it could possibly be that this is something per city that needs to be looked at as well, you know, if the population comes into play. But I think ultimately, I totally lost my train of thought there, go ahead, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it comes down back around again to culture and education, because if every elementary school had classes about the way that we use pesticides and our whole approach to the concept of pests and all those things, then we wouldn't have completely uneducated people coming in and applying pesticides while children are playing in the playground 50 feet away and the wind's blowing in that direction.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's what I was going to say. I don't know that people are completely aware of Roundup Ready equaling GMO, and then Roundup being sprayed at the same time, what those concerns are. I mean, I think that there's a possibility that we're just have a major oversight in our education overall on pesticides. There's a ton of old timers who have an attitude, and not just old timers, but there's a lot of people out there who have an attitude that Roundup is something that is just no big deal. It's never going to hurt you. There's no way it's ever going to be an issue. And meanwhile, there are studies coming out all over the world that are saying this is a real issue. This is what's happening. Amphibians are going from male to female because of Roundup, because of glyphosate. So, yeah, thanks guys.
There's an interesting interview, if you Google, it's with Dr. Mercola, who is, controversial, although sometimes way ahead of everybody else, with a very senior research professor at MIT, who's published, on the order of 150 research articles. And she's talking about glyphosate, and it's about an hour-long interview. And if you just Google glyphosate MIT Mercola, it'll come up. Very interesting interview.
Can you spell that?
With Mercola?
Yeah,
But like Roundup is glyphosate, and Mercola is Mercola. And the gal's last name is like Stevens, I want to say that anyways.
Thanks, y'all. I would like to ask a question that's regarding the progress of what, from your perspective, you think that Asheville, the largest steps that we could take, that being the next steps that we need to take against, for reducing our pesticide use. And for you, it's David, right? For you, David, it could be applied in that you don't live here, but how can we get one of you? Like right now, Asheville has, we have a.
I'm not that special, it's the policy and the...
But it's, right, I remember from your story, so there was a man and he, in 1999, right?
Yeah.
So it would be, in my mind, important for us to recreate something such as that man did. And I think it would be connecting you, Dee, because, so I'm gonna have you talk, but for a second, I'm gonna talk. It seems like we need the real facts, as real as they can get, as non-biased and not as connected to Monsanto, of course, as we can get. And we need to make that as short as possible for folks, because it gets real confusing real fast. There's a lot of terminology. We're not scientists. The lay person isn't. So we need to be getting the information, A, about the cancers, and this is for everyone to just listen to too. It's about like, what are the negative effects on the people, what's the negative effects on the animals, and we need stats. Like, I can say that, I know that, but I can't pop it out to a city council member and say, in Asheville, I'm going to find I'm going to find glyphosate, I'm going to find this in the waters. And then this is the effect of that on the human population, on the wildlife. And so I'm coming to you to request a integrated pest management position be created and be paid with our tax dollars. Okay, so that's my spiel. So it's going to take a little bit to get there, and so I'd just like to hear, especially from Dee, what information that you know of, A, places to get it, and B, if you already know, like, there's a pretty decent breakout on Roundup and the other major things that the city is using, and the effects of it, just where to go for those resources, and then any thoughts on the next steps to be able to present that to the council, or just in our worlds, what to do.
I guess the first thing, and in all caps, I would caution you, this is scary to a lot of people, very uncomfortable. Like, I would rather hear anything but this. If this came on the TV, I would change the channel. Or if it came on the radio, right? So, well, right. So people, you know, like, this hurts, this is scary, and now you're talking about chemicals, and I don't really understand that, or you're going to talk about health, medicine stuff, I don't understand that. But, and so it's natural to kind of shy away from that. So it's very important to really be careful about delivery. I mean, if somebody comes up to me and says, I want to show you these pictures of these horrifying things happening to animals in factory farms, I'm like, no. I don't want to see any of them, right? So it's really important to carefully craft the message. And I would say, don't try to reinvent the wheel. So look at some of these communities that have really moved ahead and look at what their educational material says. And often, in order to get action, we don't need to hammer people with, like, the eggs inside of the fetuses inside of pregnant women today are genetically being altered. True. Because of the chemicals that are, you know, people are like, what? So, no. So, kind of looking at what it takes, what people are interested in, and what message is effective, but not too much scare, you know, and more about a vision of a healthy community for our future, and being responsible stewards, and, you know, caring for the environment, and reducing costs at the public health department, reducing all of our insurance costs because we have healthier people, etc., improving worker productivity, because people who are healthy come to work, buildings with natural lighting, make people more productive, they're happier, they take fewer sick days, etc., you know, and that's why we have LEED certified gold buildings as our city buildings here in Asheville. And that actually came from a student at UNCA who really brought that home to the city council on, you know, all the data that was largely from a study done in California on, you know, what really worked and how appealing it was, and financially how much sense it made. So this can be couched in lots of different ways that kind of say, wow, don't we want this future? And people go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, let's do that. So I would actually look at the material from other places, and but, you know, and in terms of cancer, you get into probabilities, and you get into, like, you know, how can you prove that this caused the cancer and not this, and, you know, so, or you're talking about rat models, and sometimes the rat study doesn't end up to be what happens in humans, so I probably just take a little bit of a different approach. But I definitely start with, like, looking at the materials of other communities, and even calling folks who work in those programs in other communities and say, what did you do to get your city council to approve this?
I know how to do that, but I would need, like, if you have an idea of specific cities, I guess, I mean, I know Carver now, but I would need cities and the names of the organizations. That would be most helpful.
Phyllis?
Yeah, I just want to weigh in that we were supposed to have a speaker from Montgomery County, Maryland. Maryland is one of 6 states that allow cities to have pesticide policies. North Carolina is not one of those. And so there's only 6 states that will even allow municipalities to do that. And so in the United States, Tacoma Park, Maryland was the first city to have a cosmetic pesticide ban, and they patterned theirs after the pesticide bans that have been done throughout Canada in at least 6 provinces. I don't know what they're up to now, but it's quite extensive. And it's saying, unless you need pesticides for some really good reason, if you're growing food with, and you need the pesticide to effectively grow an agricultural crop or something, if it's just to make your lawn pretty, that's a cosmetic pesticide. That's the only reason you're using it is for aesthetic purposes. And so throughout Canada, in most of their provinces, they have these pesticide bans. And so Tacoma Park, Maryland copied that. They were the first in the U.S. to do that. And we were supposed to have a speaker from there for this workshop, but she had to cancel, unfortunately. So there is a great example, and all of that's available on the internet. And they partnered with the hospital system as a public health issue and the health of their children and their schools and their parks. And they approached it from that direction.
So I would say streamline it and do all the legwork. It's all about this, all about that. When I was somewhere and someone came up to me and they were trying to get a petition signed for renewable resources, and they said, bamboo, 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 bamboo. And I'm like, okay, explain to me this concept of your renewable resource of bamboo. Well, it's great, we can do all sorts of things with it. I said, okay, where are you going to put it? Well, we can put it, places. I said, okay, well, how are you going to contain it? Because it's, how are you going to deal with it? So again, it's about thinking it down the line. When you propose something to an elected official, they want all of the information in front of them so they can skim through it, decide whether it interests them or not, and throw it away. And then they can decide on it. I'm not talking about Asheville specifically or Carver specifically or any other places I've lived in and worked for. I'm just saying as a whole, that's what a council person wants to do. They're going to sit there, they're going to skim through it, they're going to do it right before their board meeting, council meeting, and then they're going to vote on it. And that's going to be that. So find the bullet points and then figure out how to make all those things efficient. So for pesticides, for herbicide use in Asheville, let's say it's probably based on labor. It's probably based on labor hours and mechanics of how you go about treating all of these vegetative issues. And dollar for dollar, it's immediately apparently cheaper to just go ahead and spray everything. We know long term there's evidence that it's not cheaper. And so you'll probably find a good amount of people who do like the health information and the environmental information, and you can get those people to give you support. But finding those dollars and cents and then having it backed by the environmental stuff is probably the approach I would take, because they just want to know what they can do with how much money. Because they're getting pressure from various organizations, they're getting pressure from internal departments, they've got a budget to meet, they don't want to raise taxes, they can only get their money from X, You're going to have income tax and you're going to have commercial property taxes, those kinds of things, and how those play out and those balance each other. And so when you take all that stuff into consideration, if you give a cohesive package, you can have the supporting documents, but if you just have it 2-page, 3-page, 4-page bullet points, really important information with calculated costs, you're probably going to make a huge impact.
I totally agree, and I think another really key thing, at least that I found, is if you provide a list of other cities that have done it, then they look and they're like, oh, well, if they analyzed it and they all thought it made sense, then this is really worth looking into. And the closer those cities are, usually, because if it's like all these cities in Canada did it, they're like, well, they're Canadians. But especially the cities in the US. Right? Don't we own them yet? I did not say that.
They have parks and
It's the other way around.
The
Right, because, right, I mean, we're their puppets, we've got the different systems.
Parks and Rec has quoted the cost of labor, said we cannot afford to do this.
Yeah, we have been in talks, we've invited them plenty. We've invited them a lot. And there's interest. There was more interest, I feel like, before. There were a lot more things that have come up this past year that they seem to think maybe are more important than this. But what we need more than anything is, you're right, science. We need to be unbiased, and we need to come in there with concrete, and we need to come in there with some numbers. We need to talk about this in the way of these groups, these institutions can adopt these parks and do this.
And so far, they're not liking that. Stacy had a meeting and they were worried that people were gonna trip all over themselves and, end up suing the city. And there's other places that have done this exact same thing and nobody's gotten hurt. The worst thing, Trevor Taylor, when I opened with talking about Eugene, Oregon, he said that the worst thing that's happened from it is they weren't entirely clear on their pesticide policy verbiage, which has bit them in the butt a little bit. And if they had to do over again, they would have gotten a little bit better with the clarity. They also said that sometimes there are groups that adopt a park and then kind of unravel, but then a group immediately comes back up and takes over. So it's no big deal, and it's been a really, really good thing for them. So that's an exciting situation, and there are many more, and I think that we'll see many more over the course of the next couple of years, and I think that we could be a city very soon to bring in some kind of integrated pest model, anything that would lessen the amount of spraying that we're doing in the park or on any city property, and then grow food there. That's the ideal, right?
Or habitat, right?
Yes, exactly. Pollinator habitat, yeah. So we thank you guys so much for being here. Y'all are all awesome, and thank you, David, for driving all the way from Carborough.
It's a cool place to be, man. I'm saying
It is a cool place to be, isn't it? Yeah. In summation, I'm going to just give you guys a little funny anecdote because of something that Dr. Eggers brought up about the communication that you have with people. I was at a pesticide policy board meeting a couple weeks ago in Raleigh, and I was standing out there with my colleague, waiting for some other colleagues to come in before we just walked into this, meeting. Very kind of dry but important meeting. And there were some guys out there who, I think they were on their lunch break and they were renewing some kind of licensure application or license that they had. And you could tell that they were real old timers. I've been doing this for a long time. And they asked us what we were doing there. And my friend said, well, I guess we're here with the environmental group, so I guess we're here to put you out of a job. And I was flabbergasted that she even said that. I also felt kind of bad. And the last thing that I felt was by the time I got out of that pesticide policy board meeting, my tires would probably all be flat because they totally saw me come in. But I do personally operate in a way that I think that it's very important that we continue to have these conversations with each other. Dee, you're right. People are scared to have this conversation. They are die-hard into their pesticides, And they don't think that there's anything wrong with what they're doing. And for some reason, if you tell them otherwise, they're gonna get really upset.
Sure.
So finding the best ways of being able to talk about this scientifically and tackle this as a group rather than as an individual would be a blessing. And I think that it's gonna happen pretty soon. So in summation, we have one more workshop and it's on the alternatives to chemical pesticides. We have Sunil Patel from Patchwork Urban Farms. We have Randall speaking at the next one. There you go. We have Michael Wells, who's an organic farmer. He has over 200 acres of a farm that previously he was doing conventional farming methods with pesticides. Patrick Battle, Living Web Farms. We have Ryan Eckhart, who's one of the owners of Lotus, and Dr. CJ McGrath, who has her PhD in horticulture, and Joseph Salvatore from Garden Tea Company. So it will be a very busy and informative night. I think mostly we're going to be doing the panel discussion. So that's how that will go down. And I thank you guys for coming out. I hope to see you next time. Please spread the word about us.